We live as if time were an enemy. The alarm clock rings, and before we even open our eyes, we already feel the weight of the invisible race. To be more, to do more, to achieve more. But what if I told you that this rush, this anxiety for productivity and success is nothing more than a modern myth, an illusion carefully constructed to distance you from the only thing that truly exists, the present? Nietzsche would say that modern man has lost the natural rhythm of existence, and perhaps he's right. We chase after something we can't even name: status, validation, purpose, and along the way, we lose the ability to simply live. Modern society has taught us that stopping is failing, that stillness is laziness, that slowing down is wasteful. But what if true wisdom lies precisely in stopping, in listening to silence, in accepting that life is not a straight line, but a cycle, like the tides, like the beating of the heart? Know thyself, said Socrates. But how can one know oneself if there's no time to listen to one's own thoughts? We run so much that we forget where we're going. And perhaps life isn't waiting for you to arrive. It only wants you to be. What you're about to discover may change everything, including the way you see time, success, and yourself. We live in an era where the sound of the alarm clock merges with the start of the race. Life has become a silent marathon. From the cradle, we are taught to hurry our steps, to walk before others, to speak before others, to be better than others. It's as if existence has turned into a stopwatch, and whoever doesn't rush loses. But who said there's even a finish line? Nietzsche, with his sharp gaze upon modern society, once warned, "He who has a why can bear almost any how." The problem is that many are running without knowing their why. Ignorance begins when we confuse speed with value. This belief, deeply rooted in our culture of productivity, creates a toxic cycle, the constant pursuit of more money, more recognition, more success. It's the addiction to doing, one of the most well-documented psychological phenomena of our time. The anxiety born from the need to always be producing. The result? A tired body, an exhausted mind, and a soul that cries out for stillness. The consequence is clear. We lose the present. We live as if every minute were just a step toward the future, never a space to breathe. And it's at that moment that life, in its essence, begins to slip away. The philosopher Seneca once said, "It is foolish to run toward the future and forget the present." Yet we keep running, as if tomorrow were a promise. In everyday life, this translates into small tragedies. The father who doesn't see his child grow up, the young person who feels guilty for not being successful at 25, the woman who feels behind because she compares her journey to that of digital influencers. Everything is measured by pace. Everything is competition. But what happens when the heart, that organ that beats in cycles, tries to keep up with the ticking of modern haste? It becomes ill. The philosophical solution, according to Socrates, is simple, but it demands courage to question your own movement. Why are you running? What are you truly trying to reach? And what if this rush is nothing but a disguise to avoid facing the emptiness within? The Socratic maieutic, the act of giving birth to ideas through dialogue, invites us to stop and think, not to conclude, but to understand. Life is not a race, but a dialogue, a space of listening between who we are and who we pretend to be. And perhaps, if we truly listened, we would realize that haste is nothing more than the fear of not being enough. Because deep down, wisdom lies in accepting the natural rhythm of existence. And you, have you ever had the courage to stop and listen to the silence within yourself? We live under the belief that life is a staircase, that each step brings us closer to something grand called success. From an early age, modern society teaches us that human worth is measured by ascent, diploma, career, status, possessions. But what happens when the top doesn't exist? Nietzsche observed, "He who fights with monsters should be careful lest he thereby become one." And perhaps the monster of our time is precisely this illusion of constant progress, an endless race in pursuit of a horizon that never arrives. Ignorance begins when we confuse progress with meaning. We run because we believe that stopping is dying. The market, social media, and the culture of productivity reinforce the idea that being busy is a sign of importance. But this belief creates a new form of slavery, the slavery of time. Today, the clock is the new whip. Not the natural time of the seasons, but the mechanical time of profit. Every second must produce. And the worst part? We've begun to measure our self-worth by the number of tasks we complete. The consequence is emptiness. When everything becomes a goal, meaning disappears. We work more, accumulate more, post more, and feel less. Science confirms it. Studies from Stanford University show that excessive multitasking reduces our ability to concentrate and increases anxiety by up to 40%. In other words, the more we run, the less present we are. In everyday life, this illusion shows up in subtle ways. The young person who lives to get there without knowing where there is. The professional who trades dinner with family for a meeting that changes nothing. The woman who feels guilty for resting as if rest were a modern sin. We live in the paradox of constant motion, always active, yet rarely alive. Socrates would say that true progress begins when we learn to stop and question. The unexamined life is not worth living. Watch. And perhaps that's what we're missing, to examine the race itself, to ask whether this progress is real or merely another way to avoid facing the void within. The philosophical solution lies in accepting the cyclical nature of life. Just as the moon waxes and wanes, there are moments of expansion and of retreat. To force the cycle is to challenge the cosmos itself. Wisdom is understanding that true advancement is not movement in a straight line, but movement in a spiral, one that returns to the same point, but with new consciousness. So I ask you, are you running because you want to arrive, or because you're afraid to stay? If this reflection resonates with you, like this video and subscribe to continue this philosophical dialogue. There is a deep mistake in believing that life is a straight line. Nietzsche, ever the provocateur, said that modern man suffers because he has lost contact with the eternal return. And what is the eternal return, if not the reminder that everything, absolutely everything, happens in cycles, day and night? The breath that comes and goes, the heart that contracts and expands. Existence itself is a dance between opposites, and yet we insist on running as if destiny were a period, not a circle. Ignorance begins when we rebel against this natural rhythm. We want to control time as if it were a line stretching ahead of us instead of a circle surrounding us. Modern society calls this life planning. We plan every step, every goal, every decade, and still, when something escapes the plan, we call it failure. How ironic. We try to dominate the flow of the universe and get angry when it refuses to obey our calendar. The consequence of this desire for control is anxiety, and it shows itself in subtle ways. The fear of missing opportunities, the frustration of not being ahead enough, the despair of aging. It is the price of linear thinking. The modern mind, obsessed with results, forgets that life is made of pauses. Just as winter prepares spring, silence prepares blooming. Science supports this. Research on ultradian rhythms shows that the human body naturally cycles between 90 to 120 minutes of energy and rest. Ignoring that rhythm is a subtle form of self-sabotage. The philosopher Heraclitus said, "Everything flows and nothing remains." But that phrase, so often misunderstood, doesn't mean that nothing has meaning. It means that meaning is found in the flow itself. It is impermanence that makes life sacred. When we accept the cycle, we stop fighting the tide and start dancing with it. Modern life, however, conditions us to resist the cycle. We want to live in perpetual summer, always productive, joyful, active, but the soul also needs autumn, a time for retreat. Nietzsche understood this. What does not kill us makes us stronger. Pain is the winter of the soul, and blooming always comes afterward. Suffering, when accepted, becomes the seed of wisdom. The philosophical solution, then, is balance. To know when to act and when to be silent, when to plant and when to harvest. Spirituality, far from being an escape, is the art of aligning one's heart with the rhythm of the universe. Socrates would say, "He who wants to move the world must first move himself." And that movement, paradoxically, begins in stillness. So, breathe. Observe the ebb and flow of your own breath. It reminds you that everything returns, even you and you. Have you respected the natural rhythm of your life, or are you still trying to outrun time? Observe a child. She runs, laughs, falls, gets up, all without any apparent purpose. She plays not to win, but because play is her way of existing. She is entirely in the present, carrying no past and fearing no future. And perhaps, without realizing it, she is the most authentic philosopher still walking among us. Because while we adults run in search of something, the child simply is. Ignorance begins when we lose this existential innocence and trade curiosity for control. We begin to live for goals, metrics, results. School replaces wonder with report cards. Society replaces spontaneity with productivity. And what was once life becomes a schedule. Nietzsche would say that adults are children who have forgotten how to play, and perhaps that's why they're always tired. The consequence is devastating. We grow up, but we shrink inside. We become serious, anxious, trapped in comparison. We want to be better than others, and in that silent race, we lose the joy of simply existing. The child looks at the sunset and calls it beautiful. The adult looks at the sunset and thinks they've wasted time watching it. What a tragedy, to live without presence. And then comes Socrates with his sharp and serene voice. The unexamined life is not worth living. Now, but what if you've never stopped to examine yourself? What if everything you believe to be important, success, prestige, productivity, is just an illusion created to avoid the silence within you? What if the race is just an elegant way to escape the void? Plato said that knowledge is recollection, and perhaps what we need to remember is the art of play. Play with time, play with existence itself, play with the mystery of being alive. When you were a child, time didn't chase you. It walked beside you. You slept without guilt, laughed without fear, cried without shame. But modern society has taught you that emotion is weakness, that rest is waste, that pausing is failure. And so you drifted away from yourself until one day you looked in the mirror and no longer recognized who you were. But there is a way back, to return to the playful essence of the soul. It's not regression, it's remembrance. Seneca said, "We must learn to live again." And to live, in this sense, is to relearn how to play with existence, without seeking reward, without stopwatch, without audience. So I ask you, with Socratic compassion and irony, are you truly living, or just running after something that was never yours? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Perhaps your reflection will be the beginning of the pause your soul has been asking for. If you've understood this far, comment. Wisdom is power. Comparison is a subtle form of self-destruction. It doesn't scream, but it corrodes. It doesn't kill instantly, but slowly poisons the soul. We live immersed in a culture that teaches us to measure our lives by someone else's ruler. The number of likes, the size of a salary, the body, the car, the vacation. Everything has turned into a competition disguised as inspiration. And the worst part? We've come to see this as normal. Ignorance begins when we forget that each existence has its own rhythm, its own inner tempo. Friedrich Nietzsche, with his usual provocation, once said, "Become who you are." But how can we be who we are if we're constantly trying to be someone else's reflection? The paradox is cruel. By comparing ourselves, we stop living our own lives and begin chasing a shadow that will never be ours. The consequences are deep and visible: anxiety, inadequacy, a distorted sense of self-worth. A study by the Royal Society for Public Health found that prolonged use of social media is linked to a 70% increase in symptoms of anxiety and depression among young adults. Comparison is a broken mirror. You look into it, but you never see yourself whole. In everyday life, this manifests in subtle ways. The professional who can't celebrate their achievements because someone else got further. The student who doesn't rejoice in learning because it's not enough. The mother who feels guilty for not being perfect, like the one she saw on Instagram. We live in fear of being less, and that fear is the heaviest shackle of modernity. Socrates, however, would remind us that freedom begins with self-knowledge. To know yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. Comparison is the opposite of self-knowledge. It is ignorance in motion. It keeps us looking outward when true philosophical work begins within. Nietzsche would say that the free spirit is one who is content within their own nature. To be free is to accept your own rhythm, your own time, your own cycle. The solution lies in a simple yet revolutionary act: self-acceptance, not in the sense of complacency, but of reconciliation. To accept is to stop fighting what already is. It's to transform your gaze from envy to admiration, from comparison to awareness. When we stop running beside others and start walking with ourselves, we find something rare: peace. And you? How many times have you looked at others and forgotten yourself? How many times have you measured your worth with the wrong ruler? Think about it and comment. Comparison is the thief of presence. There is a kind of wisdom that can only be born in silence, but silence is frightening. In modern society, accustomed to constant noise, notifications, goals, commitments, comparisons, stopping feels like a sin. We grow uncomfortable with stillness, as if doing nothing were a threat to our productivity. And yet, it is in quietude that we rediscover life. Ignorance lies in confusing movement with existence. We run because we believe haste equals importance and stillness equals weakness. But Socrates would remind us, he who cannot govern himself will never be free. To govern oneself requires stopping, observing, listening. Stillness is not the absence of action. It's the space where consciousness reorganizes itself. The consequences of ignoring silence are evident: chronic anxiety, insomnia, exhaustion. We live intoxicated by speed. Neuroscience proves that the human brain needs moments of inactivity to consolidate memories and restore cognitive function. In other words, rest is not a luxury, it's biological wisdom. But driven by the illusion of progress, we have become slaves to productivity. In practice, this manifests as automated lives, people who work to the limit but don't know why, minds full of tasks but empty of purpose. Stillness is the antidote to this modern poison. It gives us back the power to feel the now, the taste of coffee, the touch of wind, the distant hum of life passing by. Nietzsche, with his penetrating view of existence, once said, "He who stares into the abyss will find that the abyss stares back at him." Silence is that abyss. And by facing it, we don't lose ourselves. We find ourselves. It's there that we discover that haste was only fear, and that fear, disguised as movement, was keeping us from living. The solution is to embrace simplicity. To be silent is not to give up on life. It's to accept it as it is. To understand that there is more wisdom in a single conscious breath than in 1,000 hurried tasks. Meditation in this sense is an inner revolution, a return to essence, a liberation from the chains of comparison and time. Close your eyes, breathe. Notice how life doesn't ask you to run, only to exist. And you? Do you have the courage to sit in silence with yourself without needing to prove anything to anyone? We live in a world obsessed with speed, fast downloads, instant replies, immediate results. Everything has to be done yesterday, but life doesn't follow this digital rhythm. It blossoms slowly. The problem is we've forgotten that. We think living means accumulating experiences, when in truth, it means diving deeply into a few of them. Nietzsche once provoked, "Those who have depth do not run, they dive." Ignorance begins when we confuse quantity with meaning. We spend our lives collecting moments but rarely savor them. We want to watch the sunrise just to post it, not to feel it. Haste turns us into tourists of our own existence, and the faster we try to move, the shallower we become. Like a river that runs too quickly, we lose the ability to reflect the sky. The consequence is the impoverishment of the soul. Emotional superficiality, fragile bonds, an endless boredom disguised as movement. We run so much that we forget to be present. Psychology calls this performance anxiety, the belief that every moment must produce a result. But life is not a report, it's a breath, and breathing takes time. In daily life, this shows up when we even turn rest into productivity. I did yoga today, check. Read a book, check. Everything becomes a goal. Even peace has become a task. But Socrates would remind us, it's not that life is short, it's that we waste too much of it. We waste it when we chase time instead of inhabiting it. We waste it when we measure the value of a moment by its usefulness. The philosophical solution is a return to presence, to be where your feet are, to talk without checking the clock, to eat without thinking about the next appointment. A depth is born when we allow ourselves to feel what the moment offers, without hurry, without goals, without comparison. It is practical spirituality, the art of seeing the sacred in the ordinary. Nietzsche would say, "The greatness of man is that he is a bridge, not a goal." To be a bridge is to move, but to do so consciously, with awareness of every step. It's to accept the flow without losing depth, to understand that true freedom is not about going faster, it's about going deeper. So I ask you, are you truly living life or merely passing through it? Have you savored your days or merely counted the hours? The answer isn't found in time, it's found in how you inhabit it. There comes a moment when the soul, exhausted from running, simply stops. Not from resignation, but from revelation. It realizes there was never a finish line, that all the running, the chasing, the comparing, the anxiety was only a way of fleeing from oneself. And it's in that moment that true freedom is born. Nietzsche would call it self-overcoming. Socrates would call it self-mastery. Both would agree. The free person is not the one who does whatever they want, but the one who understands why they do what they do. Ignorance begins when we believe life is a project to be completed. We run to get there, but we don't even know where there is. Modern society has addicted us to movement, goals, notifications, validation. Each achievement gives us a brief euphoria, and then we crave another. It's the dopamine cycle, as neuroscience confirms, the same mechanism behind addiction, and yet we call it success. The consequence is existential exhaustion, a void that no goal can fill. Like an exhausted runner who, even after crossing the finish line, realizes no one was watching. The race was against his own reflection, and in that mirror, there's only one gaze, that of someone who no longer knows who they are. Because the more you run, the further you drift from yourself. But there is another path, the Socratic path of conscious pause. Socrates would say, "He is not free who is not master of himself." To stop, in this sense, is the most courageous act a human being can commit. It is to say no to haste, to comparison, to the illusion of progress. It is to allow yourself to simply be without needing to prove anything. It is to walk in silence while the world shouts. It is to replace the verb to conquer with the verb to contemplate. In practice, this liberation happens when you redefine what success means. Perhaps success is not arriving first, but arriving whole. Perhaps happiness is not having more, but needing less. Perhaps purpose lies not in winning, but in living with awareness. When inner freedom replaces external haste, the race loses its meaning. Nietzsche once said, "He who conquers himself is mightier than he who conquers the world." That is the true victory. The moment you stop and time for the first time stops with you, life becomes simple, and simplicity at last is enough. You realize there was never a race, only paths. And the true prize was being awake the whole time. So I ask you with philosophical sincerity, do you want to keep running or finally learn to walk with yourself? There is a silent strength in those who walk slowly. While the world runs after goals, likes, and invisible medals, those who slow down begin to see what truly matters. Nietzsche said, "The maturity of man is to have rediscovered the seriousness he had as a child at play." And perhaps that's what slowness gives back to us, the seriousness of play, the lightness of existence, the joy of being present. Ignorance begins when we confuse slowness with weakness. We live in a culture that worships haste, the fast, the immediate, the productive. But time, wise and unyielding, does not allow itself to be rushed. Nature does not hurry the blooming of the flower, nor the ripening of the fruit. So why do we believe the human soul can flourish under pressure? Life has its own rhythm, and wisdom is learning to dance with it. The consequence of speed is the loss of flavor. We eat quickly, love quickly, sleep quickly. We want to arrive quickly, at nowhere, and in doing so, we waste the present, the only time that truly exists. Haste robs us of the now, and the now is where happiness lives. Seneca wrote, "It's not that we have little time, but that we waste much of it." And he was right. Slowness, on the other hand, is not passivity, it is active presence. It is doing less, but feeling more. It is exchanging the noise of urgency for the melody of awareness. It is transforming the simple into the sacred. It is meditation in motion, calm that breathes, practical spirituality. Those who slow down begin to see the beauty in routine, the silence between notes, the pause between thoughts. The philosophical solution is acceptance, not the acceptance of inertia, but of reality. To accept is to flow with life without trying to control it. It is to understand that we are not late. We are simply moving at our own rhythm. Nietzsche would call this amor fati, the love of fate, to embrace what is without wishing it were different. Socrates would say this is the moment when man reconciles with the cosmos, when he stops trying to dominate time and begins to inhabit it. When we live slowly, the world doesn't slow down, but the heart does. And in the silence between one heartbeat and the next, we find what we were always looking for, peace. Not the peace of absence, but the peace of presence. The wisdom of slowness is understanding that to live is not to arrive, it is to perceive. And you? Do you have the courage to slow down, even when everyone else seems to be running? Perhaps the secret is not in walking faster, but in seeing deeper. And so we arrive at the end, or perhaps the beginning. Because understanding that life is not a race is, in truth, the first step toward truly living it. Nietzsche would say, "He who has a why can bear almost any how." And now you know, your why was never in the future. It has always been here, in the present, waiting for you to stop long enough to hear it. We've spent so much time trying to prove something that we've forgotten the essential, the simple act of existing. We run for fear of being forgotten, when in fact, the greatest forgetting is that of ourselves. But Socrates, with his sharp serenity, would remind us, the unexamined life is not worth living. Philosophy, when truly lived, is a form of meditation. And to meditate is simply to look into your own consciousness, without hurry, without judgment, without escape. Stillness, slowness, balance, all are disguised teachers. They remind us that meaning is not found in arriving first, but in being awake along the way. Take a deep breath. Feel time not as an enemy, but as a companion. Feel life not as a goal, but as presence. Feel yourself not as someone in progress, but as someone whole right now. True freedom is not needing to run. It is walking in peace with your own rhythm. and in the end, discovering that the only prize is your own awakening. If this reflection touched you, comment below. Freedom begins when I stop running. And if you want to continue this philosophical dialogue, subscribe and share this video, because the next step may reveal something even deeper.